Everything you're experiencing right now, the inflation crushing your grocery budget, the government spending that never seems to solve anything, the economic experts on TV who can't explain why the predictions keep failing. Milton Friedman predicted all of it 50 years ago with stunning precision. And here's what will blow your mind. At the exact same time Friedman was making these predictions, the most celebrated economist of the 20th century, John Maynard Keynes, the man whose theories still dominate every central bank, every government treasury department, every economics department at prestigious universities, was predicting the exact opposite. Keynes promised that government spending would stabilize the economy, that inflation and unemployment couldn't rise together, that central banks could fine-tune prosperity through careful money management. You know what happened? Friedman was right about everything, and Keynes was wrong about everything. I'm not talking about philosophical preferences or political opinions. I'm talking about measurable, empirical, historical facts. Friedman said, if you do X, Y will happen. Governments did X. Y happened. Keynes said, if you do X, Z will happen. Governments did X. Z never happened. It's that simple. It's that devastating. Here's why this matters to you right now. Today, the economic confusion you feel when you watch the news, that's not because economics is complicated. It's because you're being taught Keynesian economics, a framework that has been empirically disproven by history over and over again. You're trying to understand reality through a broken lens. Think about how frustrating that is. You work hard, you save money, you try to plan for your future, but the experts keep telling you things that don't match what you see with your own eyes. They tell you government spending helps the economy while you watch your taxes rise and services deteriorate. They tell you inflation is transitory while your grocery bill doubles. They tell you the unemployment rate is great while you know multiple people struggling to find decent work. You're not crazy. You're not economically illiterate. You're just being lied to by an establishment that refuses to admit their theoretical framework failed the empirical test of history. Milton Friedman passed that test with flying colors. And today, I'm going to show you exactly how. If you've ever felt gaslit by economic news, you're about to experience the most liberating intellectual moment of your life. Because what I'm about to show you isn't opinion or theory. It's documented historical fact. Friedman made specific, falsifiable predictions. So did Keynes. Then history happened, and the results are undeniable. By the end of this video, you'll understand why the economic establishment clings to Keynesianism despite its repeated failures. You'll see exactly where Friedman's framework proved superior. And you'll never look at economic news the same way again, because you'll have the intellectual tools to separate propaganda from reality. This isn't about converting you to an ideology. This is about showing you what actually works, proven by the most brutal test possible, reality. If you want to discover more economists and thinkers who actually understand how the economy works, instead of the establishment narratives, subscribe to this channel where we explore the minds that got it right when everyone else got it wrong. Now, let's start with a prediction that shattered an entire economic paradigm and made Friedman a household name. In the 1960s, the Keynesian establishment had a beautiful, elegant theory about inflation and unemployment. It was called the Phillips curve, and it said these two forces moved in opposite directions, like a seesaw. If you wanted lower unemployment, you'd accept higher inflation. If you wanted lower inflation, you'd accept higher unemployment. The trade-off was fixed. The relationship was stable. Government could choose which combination it preferred. Every economics textbook taught this. Every central bank believed it. Every government policy was based on it. It was a foundation of economic management in every Western democracy. Milton Friedman looked at this consensus and said, "You're all wrong. That relationship will break down. You're going to see both high inflation and high unemployment at the same time, something your theory says is impossible." In 1967, think about this date, 1967, when Keynesian economics was at its absolute peak of influence and prestige, Friedman gave his presidential address to the American Economic Association. He stood in front of the most powerful economists in the world and told them their central theory was about to collapse. He explained exactly why. When governments try to reduce unemployment by printing money and increasing spending, workers and businesses eventually adapt to the new inflation. They build it into their expectations. They demand higher wages to compensate. They raise prices preemptively. The unemployment-reducing effect disappears, but the inflation remains. Then you get the worst of both worlds. High inflation and high unemployment simultaneously. The Keynesians literally laughed at him. Not privately, publicly. Paul Samuelson, the most influential economics textbook author in history, dismissed Friedman's prediction as theoretically impossible. James Tobin, another Keynesian giant, called absurd. The establishment was certain. The Phillips curve relationship was stable and permanent. Then the 1970s happened. Inflation exploded, reaching 13% by 1980. Unemployment exploded, reaching 10% by the early 1980s. Both at the same time. Exactly as Friedman predicted. Exactly as Keynesian theory said was impossible. The phenomenon even got a new name: stagflation, stagnant economic growth combined with inflation. A word that didn't exist before, because Keynesian theory said the condition couldn't exist. You know what's beautiful about this? Friedman didn't just predict that the Phillips curve would break down. He predicted exactly how it would break down, exactly why it would break down, and roughly when it would break down. He gave the mechanism. He gave the timeline. He gave falsifiable predictions. And when reality proved him right and the Keynesian establishment wrong, you know what happened. Friedman won the Nobel Prize in Economics in 1976, right in the middle of the stagflation crisis that vindicated his work. Here's the kicker. Even after this devastating empirical failure, most economics departments continued teaching the Phillips curve. They added modifications and complications to try to save the theory. But they never admitted the fundamental error. Because to admit Friedman was right about this meant questioning the entire edifice of Keynesian demand management. This is why you feel gaslit when you watch economic news. The people explaining the economy to you are using a framework that empirically failed one of the most dramatic tests in economic history. They're using a map that's been proven wrong, but they refuse to throw it away because it's the only map they know. Notice how this works in reality. When you hear government officials today say, "We can spend our way to prosperity without causing inflation," they're making the same error the 1960s Keynesians made. When you hear a little inflation is good for employment, they're repeating a theory that stagflation destroyed. When your instinct says this doesn't make sense, your instinct is correct. You're not confused because economics is hard. You're confused because you're being taught economics that reality already disproved. But there's more. Here's Friedman's second devastating prediction, and this one is acutely relevant to what you're living through right now. In the 1970s, when inflation started spiraling out of control, the Keynesian establishment had a convenient explanation. OPEC, the oil embargo, energy prices, cost-push inflation, they called it. External shocks pushing costs higher throughout the economy. Government wasn't responsible. Greedy Arabs and oil companies were. The solution, according to Keynesians, wage and price controls. Government mandates limiting how much businesses could charge and workers could earn. President Nixon, a Republican, mind you, showing how deeply Keynesian thinking had penetrated, imposed these controls in 1971. The establishment economists advised him. The public supported it. It seemed like common sense. If prices are rising too fast, just make it illegal to raise prices. Milton Friedman said, "This is completely wrong. Inflation is always and everywhere a monetary phenomenon." Think about how radical that statement was. Friedman was saying inflation has nothing to do with oil prices, greedy corporations, or supply shocks. Inflation happens when government prints too much money. Period. The mechanism is simple. More dollars chasing the same amount of goods means each dollar is worth less. Prices rise not because sellers are greedier, but because money is more abundant. He made a specific, testable prediction. Look at the money supply. When government rapidly increases the money supply, inflation will follow 12 to 18 months later. Every time, without exception, you can predict future inflation by looking at what central banks are doing with money supply today. The Keynesian said this was simplistic, outdated, that modern economies were more complex, that velocity of money was unstable, that other factors mattered more. Friedman responded, "Fine, let's test it. I predict that countries with rapid money supply growth will experience high inflation. Countries with slow money supply growth will experience low inflation. And wage price controls will fail completely because they don't address the actual cause." He even wrote a paper with Anna Schwartz, a collaboration that would produce a monetary history of the United States, one of the most important economics books ever written, documenting that every major inflation in American history was preceded by rapid money supply growth. Every single one. Going back a century. What happened? Exactly what Friedman predicted. Countries that control money supply growth, like Germany, traumatized by Weimar hyperinflation, experienced low inflation even during the oil crisis. Countries that printed money rapidly experienced high inflation regardless of oil prices. The correlation was undeniable. The causation was clear. And the wage price controls? They created shortages, black markets, and economic distortions, exactly as Friedman warned, while doing absolutely nothing to stop inflation. Nixon abandoned them in 1974 as an obvious failure. Here's what makes this prediction so powerful. Friedman gave us a simple, observable metric. You don't need a PhD in economics. You don't need complex models. Just watch what the central bank is doing with money supply. If they're printing rapidly, inflation is coming. If they're restraining growth, inflation will fall. Let's apply this to your life right now. In 2020 to 2021, the Federal Reserve increased the money supply by approximately 40% in 2 years. Friedman's framework predicted massive inflation coming in 12 to 18 months. What did the Keynesian establishment predict? That inflation would be transitory, that we could print trillions without consequences because the economy had slack, that the rules had changed. What happened? Inflation hit 9% in 2022, the highest in 40 years. Exactly on Friedman's timeline, exactly as his theory predicted. And what did the establishment blame? Corporate greed, greedflation, Putin's invasion of Ukraine, supply chain disruptions, everything except the actual cause. The Federal Reserve printing unprecedented amounts of money. You see the pattern? Friedman gives you a clear, simple explanation based on observable data. Keynesians give you complicated excuses that always blame someone else and always require more government intervention to fix. Your grocery bills doubled not because grocery stores suddenly became greedier in 2021. They doubled because the money supply exploded in 2020 to 2021. Friedman explained this 50 years ago. The establishment still pretends not to understand it. If this is blowing your mind as much as it's blowing mine, hit the like button so more people discover these truths that the economic establishment desperately wants to keep obscure. And now, here's where Friedman predictions get really uncomfortable for politicians of both parties, because this one destroys the foundational argument for nearly all government economic policy. John Maynard Keynes' essential thesis was beautifully seductive. During economic downturns, government should increase spending to stimulate demand. When private citizens and businesses are scared and saving instead of spending, government should step in and spend on their behalf. This spending multiplies through the economy. $1 of government spending generates more than $1 of economic activity. Eventually, the economy recovers and everyone's better off. It's elegant. It gives government a heroic role. It tells politicians that spending money, which they love doing anyway, is actually economically beneficial. It's no wonder this theory became the most popular economic idea in history. Milton Friedman said, "This is a fantasy. Government spending doesn't create prosperity. It redirects resources from productive private uses to less productive political uses. There is no free lunch." He made specific predictions. When government increases spending during recessions, you will not see the multiplier effect Keynesians promise. Instead, you'll see temporary artificial activity followed by continued stagnation. You'll see government debt increase. You'll see private investment crowded out. And you'll see the recession continue or return because you haven't addressed the actual problems. The Keynesians predicted the opposite. Every dollar of government spending will generate $1.50 or $2 of economic activity. Unemployment will fall. Growth will return. The economy will be stronger than before. We've run this experiment dozens of times. Let me give you the most dramatic example. The 2008 to 2009 financial crisis. The Obama administration, advised by Keynesian economists like Larry Summers and Christina Romer, passed a $787 billion stimulus package in 2009. They used Keynesian models to predict the results. Romer literally published a chart showing that with the stimulus, unemployment would peak at 8% and quickly fall to 6% by 2012. Friedman had died in 2006, but his intellectual heirs made counter-predictions based on his framework. The stimulus will fail. Unemployment will go higher than government predicts. Recovery will be slower. Government debt will explode. And the economy will remain sluggish because government spending doesn't create sustainable growth. What happened? Unemployment hit 10%. Not the 8% Keynesians predicted. Recovery was the slowest since the Great Depression. Government debt doubled. And even the administration's own economists later admitted the stimulus had minimal impact. Some studies showed government spending multipliers near 0.5, meaning each dollar government spending generated only 50 cents of economic activity. Meanwhile, what Friedman had long argued proved true. The recovery eventually came not because of government stimulus, but despite it, when businesses and entrepreneurs adapted to new conditions, when bad investments were liquidated, when market forces were allowed to reallocate resources. But here's the really devastating part. We ran the experiment again in 2020 to 2021. Massive government spending, trillions in stimulus checks, PPP loans, enhanced unemployment benefits. Keynesian economists predicted rapid recovery and minimal negative consequences. Friedman's framework predicted temporary artificial demand followed by inflation and continued economic distortions. You lived through the result. Artificial demand for goods while people were paid to stay home. Supply chain chaos. Labor shortages despite unemployment benefits. And then inflation, exactly as Friedman's framework predicted. Exactly as Keynesian models didn't predict. Notice the pattern. Keynesian predictions consistently fail, but the policy prescriptions never change. Government spending didn't work in the 1930s. The Depression lasted a decade. It didn't work in the 1970s, stagflation. It didn't work in 2009, slowest recovery. It didn't work in 2020 to 2021, inflation crisis. But every single time, the establishment says, we just needed to spend more. Friedman's prediction stands undefeated. Government spending doesn't create prosperity. It can't, because government doesn't create resources. It only redirects them from taxpayers and future generations to politically favored uses. Here's why this matters to you. Every time you hear a politician promise that government spending will create jobs or grow the economy, you're hearing a prediction that has failed every empirical test for 80 years. Every time you see your taxes rise or national debt increase, you're experiencing the reality Friedman predicted and Keynesians denied. The money government spends comes from somewhere, either your paycheck today, taxes, your savings, inflation, or your children's paychecks tomorrow, debt. There is no magical multiplier. There is no free lunch. There's only the choice between who controls resources, you or politicians. Friedman was right. History proved it. The establishment still won't admit it. Moving forward, this next prediction is perhaps Friedman's most profound, and the one the establishment hates most, because it challenges the very legitimacy of central banking as currently practiced. Keynes and his followers believed in discretionary monetary policy. The idea was that brilliant economists at central banks could actively manage the economy by adjusting interest rates and money supply in response to changing conditions. They could fine-tune prosperity. They could prevent recessions. They could optimize unemployment and inflation. They just needed enough power, enough data, and enough freedom from political interference. It's the technocratic dream, ruled by enlightened experts who know better than markets. Milton Friedman said, "This is dangerous hubris. Central bankers don't have the knowledge, the ability, or the incentives to manage an economy. They will make mistakes. They will create booms and busts. And they will refuse to admit when they're wrong." He made a radical prediction. A simple mechanical rule, like increasing money supply by 3 to 4% annually, matching long-term economic growth, would produce better outcomes than brilliant economists trying to actively manage the economy. Think about how insulting this was to the establishment. Friedman was saying a simple formula would outperform Nobel Prize winners, Fed chairmen with PhDs, and the most sophisticated economic models ever created. He was saying expertise and discretion were worse than mechanical simplicity. The Keynesians were outraged. You can't run an economy with a simple rule. Conditions change. We need flexibility. We need experts who can respond to crises. Friedman responded, "Watch what happens when you give central banks discretionary power. They will cause the very instability they claim to prevent." And then he documented it. In A Monetary History of the United States, Friedman and Schwartz showed that the Great Depression, the worst economic catastrophe in American history, was caused by Federal Reserve mistakes, not by market failure, not by capitalism's inherent instability, but by central bankers making discretionary decisions that contracted the money supply by 1/3. The Fed had the power to prevent the Depression. They chose not to use it because they thought they were making smart, nuanced decisions in response to complex conditions. Friedman's prediction: every time you give central banks discretionary power, they will create boom-bust cycles. They will keep interest rates too low for too long, creating artificial booms. Then they'll panic and tighten too hard, creating busts. Then they'll deny responsibility and demand more power to fix the problems they created. Has this prediction held up? Let's count. The 1970s inflation, Fed keeping money too loose too long. The 2000s housing bubble, Fed keeping interest rates at 1% for years, creating artificial housing demand. The 2008 crash, Fed tightening after the bubble burst. The 2020 to 2022 inflation, Fed keeping rates near zero and printing trillions, then claiming inflation would be transitory. Every single boom-bust cycle in the last 50 years follows Friedman's predicted pattern. Central bank creates artificial boom with loose money, then creates bust with tight money or lets inflation run wild, then denies responsibility. And every single time, what do central bankers say? We need more tools, more power, more discretion, more independence from political interference. Here's what's so brilliant about Friedman's alternative. A simple rule takes away the discretion that enables these disasters. If the Fed had to increase money supply by 3% annually, no more, no less, they couldn't create artificial booms. They couldn't panic and create busts. They couldn't respond to political pressure. They'd just follow the rule. Would this prevent all economic problems? No. Friedman never claimed it would. Markets naturally go through adjustments. Businesses fail. Industries change. That's capitalism working. But it would prevent central bank-created disasters. It would prevent the boom-bust cycles that destroy savings and jobs. It would prevent the inflation that transfers wealth from savers to debtors. The Keynesian establishment hates this prediction because it reveals an uncomfortable truth. The experts don't actually make things better. The sophisticated models don't actually work. The discretionary power doesn't actually improve outcomes. Your instinct that the Fed keeps screwing things up? Friedman predicted that 60 years ago. Your frustration that they never seem to learn? Friedman explained why. They face no real accountability, and admitting their errors would undermine their legitimacy. The simple rule would work better than the experts. History has proven Friedman right over and over again, but don't expect the experts to admit it, because that would mean admitting they're not actually necessary. And now, let me show you Friedman's most morally powerful prediction, the one that exposes how good intentions combined with bad economics create devastating harm to the very people government claims to help. Keynesian economists and progressive politicians have always supported minimum wage laws. The logic seems compassionate. If low-skilled workers aren't earning enough, pass a law requiring employers to pay them more. Instantly, poor workers are better off. It's simple. It's direct. It's obvious. Milton Friedman said, "You're about to hurt the exact people you're trying to help, and the people hurt worse will be young, Black Americans with few skills." In the 1960s, when minimum wage laws were expanding, Friedman made a specific, testable prediction. Minimum wage laws will increase unemployment among the least skilled workers, teenagers, minorities, people without education or experience. The people who most need entry-level jobs to gain skills will be priced out of the labor market entirely. You will create a permanent underclass of unemployable youth. The Keynesian establishment said this was heartless conservative economics. They predicted minimum wage laws would reduce poverty without increasing unemployment. Some even predicted that higher wages would increase employment by boosting consumer spending, the same magical multiplier thinking. Friedman explained the mechanism. When government makes it illegal to hire someone for less than $X per hour, anyone whose productivity is worth less than $X becomes unemployable. Employers aren't being greedy. They literally cannot afford to hire workers who produce less value than they cost. The law doesn't make low-skilled workers more productive. It just makes them illegal to hire. He predicted specific consequences. Black teenage unemployment will skyrocket. Because of racism and educational inequality, young Black Americans already face disadvantages. The minimum wage will make it impossible for them to compete by offering to work for less while they learn. They'll be stuck in generational poverty because they can't get that first job that teaches work habits and build a resume. What happened? In 1954, before minimum wage laws expanded, Black teenage unemployment was roughly the same as white teenage unemployment, about 16 to 17%. After minimum wage increases in the late 1950s and 1960s, Black teenage unemployment soared to 30%, then 40%, and has remained roughly double white teenage unemployment ever since. Think about what Friedman was describing. A generation of young Black Americans who wanted to work, who needed work experience, who were willing to start at the bottom and prove themselves, denied that opportunity by a law that claimed to help them. Friedman called minimum wage laws the most anti-Black legislation on the books, not because of racist intent. The intentions were good, but because of inevitable economic consequences. When you make it illegal to hire someone whose skills are worth $8 per hour for $8 per hour, that person doesn't get a raise to $15 per hour. They get 0 hours. Zero experience, zero opportunity. The Keynesian establishment response? We need more government programs to help unemployed youth, more job training programs, more welfare, more subsidies, never admitting that government created the unemployment in the first place. Fast forward to today. Cities like Seattle and San Francisco have pushed minimum wages to $15, $16, even $18 per hour. Friedman's prediction: you'll see restaurant closures. You'll see automation replacing human workers. You'll see young people with no work history unable to find any job. What's happening? Restaurants going cashierless. Self-checkout replacing entry-level retail workers. Teenagers unable to find summer jobs. Exactly as Friedman predicted. And the political response? We need $25 minimum wage. We need universal basic income to help people who can't find work, never connecting cause and effect. Here's the tragedy. Every minimum wage worker who has a job is visible. Politicians can point to them and say, "See, we helped." The teenagers who never get hired, who never learn responsibility, who never start climbing the economic ladder, they're invisible. They're the unseen victims of good intentions. Friedman made those victims visible. He predicted their suffering decades before it happened. He explained exactly why compassionate-sounding policy would create cruel outcomes. You know what's most devastating? The Black unemployment crisis, the generational poverty, the communities where teenagers see no path from school to work. Friedman predicted all of it, not because he was heartless, but because he understood economic reality better than the people claiming to care. Good intentions don't override economic law. Caring doesn't make bad policy work. And refusing to admit your policy failed, while the victims pile up, is the opposite of compassion. Friedman was right. The evidence is overwhelming. But admitting he was right would mean admitting that decades of progressive policy hurt the very people it claimed to help. So the establishment will never admit it, but you can see it. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You now have something the economic establishment desperately doesn't want you to have: evidence. Not theories, not models, not philosophical arguments about how the economy should work. Actual evidence of how the economy does work. 7 specific predictions. 7 times reality had to choose between Friedman and Keynes. 7 times Friedman was proven right, and the establishment was proven wrong. Stagflation would happen, impossible according to Keynesians. Inflation comes from money supply, not oil prices or greed. Keynesians blamed everything except money printing. Government spending doesn't multiply prosperity. Keynesians still claim it does. Central bank discretion creates boom-bust cycles. Keynesians still worship expert management. Minimum wage laws hurt the least skilled workers. Keynesians still push higher minimums. And I didn't even cover Friedman's predictions about school choice improving education while teachers' unions fought him, or his predictions about Social Security's unsustainability, or his predictions about how regulation protects established businesses from competition, or his warnings about the welfare state creating dependency. Every single time, without exception, Friedman's free market framework predicted reality better than Keynesian government intervention framework. This isn't about politics. This isn't about left versus right. This is about what actually works, tested by the most unforgiving judge possible: historical reality. You know why this revelation is so powerful? Because it means your confusion about economic news isn't your fault. You've been trying to understand the world through a framework that empirical evidence has repeatedly falsified. You've been taught Keynesian economics in school, heard it from politicians, seen it in media, and it's wrong. Provably wrong. Wrong in ways that created the stagflation crisis, the housing bubble, the inflation you're experiencing right now. Milton Friedman gave us a better framework. Simpler, more accurate, more honest about trade-offs and limitations. And most importantly, actually predictive of reality. The establishment won't teach you this. They can't. Because admitting Friedman was right means admitting their entire careers were built on theories that failed. It means admitting the policies they champion hurt people. It means admitting that free markets work better than expert management. But you don't need the establishment to admit it. You have the evidence now. You've seen the predictions. You've seen the results. You can trust your own eyes. From now on, when you hear economic news, you have a superpower. You can test claims against Friedman's framework. When politicians promise the spending will create jobs and grow the economy, ask, where's the money coming from? What productive uses is it being redirected from? What does Friedman's prediction say will actually happen? Then watch. The prediction will prove more accurate than the promise. When the Federal Reserve announces policy changes, ask, are they following a simple rule or making discretionary decisions? What does Friedman's framework predict will happen? The pattern of boom-bust denial will reveal itself. When you hear about minimum wage increases proposed to help the poor, ask, who becomes unemployable at this wage floor? What happens to teenagers and low-skill workers? Then look at employment data for those groups 6 months later. Friedman's prediction will hold. When economists on TV blame inflation on corporate greed, supply chains, or foreign events, ask, what did the money supply do 12 to 18 months ago? You'll find the real cause Friedman identified. You don't need a PhD in economics. You don't need complex mathematical models. You just need to remember Friedman's simple insights. Inflation is a monetary phenomenon. Government spending isn't free. Price controls create shortages. There's no free lunch. And then watch how reliably these simple truths predict reality while sophisticated Keynesian models fail. In a world of economic confusion and gaslighting, Friedman gave us clarity. In a world where experts claim complex problems require complex government solutions, Friedman showed that simple market mechanisms work better. In a world where good intentions excuse bad results, Friedman insisted on measuring actual outcomes. You now have the intellectual framework that's been empirically validated by 50 years of history. Use it, trust it, and watch how much clearer economic reality becomes. There's a moment in one of Friedman's debates where his opponent, frustrated by Friedman's relentless focus on evidence, says, "But Professor Friedman, don't you care about helping people?" And Friedman responds with devastating calm, "I care enough to look at whether the policies actually help. You care enough to feel good about your intentions. That difference between intentions and results, between what sounds good and what works, between feeling compassionate and actually being effective, that's the difference between Keynesian economics and Friedman's economics. Keynesians promise they can manage the economy, control inflation, create prosperity through spending, and help the poor through price controls. It sounds wonderful. It feels compassionate. It gives government heroic purpose. It just doesn't work. History proved it. 7 predictions, 7 failures. Friedman promised something less emotionally satisfying, but infinitely more valuable. Truth. Here's how the economy actually works. Here's what will happen if you do X. I can't make reality gentler, but I can help you understand it clearly. And he delivered every prediction. Every time. Your life 6 months from now, after internalizing Friedman's framework, you won't feel confused by economic news. You won't feel gaslit by experts. You won't wonder why policies keep failing while politicians keep promising the same solutions. You'll see clearly. You'll predict accurately. You'll understand the economic reality around you better than the people claiming expertise. This channel exists to discover together the thinkers who got it right when the establishment got it wrong. People like Milton Friedman who valued truth over popularity, evidence over intentions, and reality over ideology. Subscribe if you want to continue this journey of intellectual clarity. In the next video, we'll explore Friedman's most controversial achievement, how he helped end military conscription, and why all volunteer militaries work better. See you there. And meanwhile, may freedom and truth guide your understanding.